losing a parent at a young age, the first in his family to graduate college. Today, one of America's premier finance professionals. This week with Curtis Lane on Jewish Grit. Welcome to Jewish Grit. This week, we're really fortunate to have an amazing healthcare investor and advisor with us in the studio. Welcome, Curtis Lane. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to come here.
Oh, my pleasure.
So, thank God, you're high in the investment world, healthcare investment, but I'm sure it wasn't always a bowl of peaches. Amongst the roses, there were definitely some thorns, and we like talking about Jewish grit, those moments which kind of push us against the ropes. We got to come back. And how we come back, how we rebound, and how we succeed. If I ask you to think of one moment where you really need a Jewish grit to make it out of it, what pops into your head?
So when I think about Jewish grit, I think it's embedded in everything that we do, and it's now become part of our genes. But for me, it wasn't some one event that I had to deal with at that moment. It's an event that affected my entire life, and that was the loss of my mother as a 7-year-old.
Wow.
And that creates, a situation in which you're dealing with a loss and a trauma, and it's a part of you for your entire life.
And how did you come out of that hole and successful?
I'm still figuring it out. Really? It's been a few years. It's been a long time, but still figuring it out. But it's very much a part of who you are and recognizing what things in your life had an impact on you. And at the end of the day, developing grit comes the loss of a parent. You either compensate or you don't. And if you don't, you've got different type of problems. But if you do, that builds in for you grit.
How do you compensate for such a thing? It just sounds like your whole world collapses on you in one moment.
Well, you don't really know about it. You're a kid, right? It's really the voids it leaves during various periods of your life. And then how other people fill in and give you the love and affection and support that you need. But a lot of it comes on you to have to do more than you might have done if you had had both parents.
Do you feel it impacted you as a parent as well?
Big time, absolutely. And I married a woman who lost her father at 6. So you imagine our first date. We have both, we both lost our opposite sex parents at 6 and 7. And on our first date, we found that out. So we're incredibly committed to our family and to having a stable family, given that both of us never experienced that.
So you've turned something really difficult into something solid for your family.
My family, and then also, it's one of the areas of philanthropy that we're involved in is that, it's something that we think about all the time, and, it's part of you. And so after 9/11, when all the kids lost parents, it was the first time I did something philanthropically, and I helped set up a thing called America's Camp, which is a camp where one of the camps that our kids in the Northeast went to, not one of the Jewish camps, more of a sports camp, where they went to, that one of those camps basically hosted kids from 9/11 who lost their parents every summer for a week. And at the beginning, there were bereavement counselors and others there, and it became a real community. We got up to about 250 kids, and they stayed in, they've aged out of needing a camp, but yet they created their own social interactive group, and they still keep in touch with each other. It's been very nice. And then now fast forward to what's happening in Israel. We did that in Israel also with a different approach, because there's so many different, everybody was throwing money and resources and ideas to Israel. And I always knew that I wanted to approach this issue, but I waited for it to shake out a little bit. And then I went over a couple times and interviewed lots of different agencies that are working with orphans. And I went and I spoke to 10, 12 of the NGOs that are dealing in different ways with kids who've lost parents. Some are just financially oriented to be able to handle financial pressures and needs over life. Others are more, community-based. Others are therapeutically based. So I went and I talked to all of them, and I wasn't sure where I was going to place my bet to spend my time and my money. And I ran into someone who had put together what's now called the War Orphans Forum, which is basically, given that everybody's running around, she had the idea, let's just make sure that we convene all the different organizations that are working in this area to make sure that there's no duplication and there are no gaps that go unfilled. And so I've kind of gotten actively involved with her, helping her build the team and build out the strategy to figure out how to get that going, and it's up and running, and it's been very effective.
Beautiful, amazing. Can you take us back a little? So your kid has grown up without a mom, obviously with all the trauma and difficulty. So how do you eventually become successful in terms of your profession, and then become more successful, and then what happened to you?
You know, it's, I think at the end of the day, it's the examples that are set for you. I'm the first person in my family to graduate from college.
Wow.
My father came out of the ghetto and did the traditional, you know, his parents were Ukrainian. And his father died. My father's father died when he was 13, and my aunt was 16, and they lived in Brooklyn, and my grandmother was a Zaftik Ukrainian. Turns out she was pregnant when my grandfather died, and they didn't have the money to be able to support that child who was put up for adoption. That's how poor they were. So my father made it out of that environment through the garment district, just like so many others did. Started making little girls' clothes and got to middle class, one might argue upper middle class in Long Island in terms of like very much a part of our history. But he raised my brother and I as if we're still in Brooklyn without any money. So even though we lived in an environment that was reasonably successful and comfortable, he treated us as if we had no money and you had to work. So that's what we did, and we learned how to work.
So you go to college as the first in your whole family?
The first to graduate. My brother tried it. It didn't quite work out for him.
To each their own?
Right.
What was your first job?
My first job ever, or my first job out of school?
College.
Out of school.
Well, actually, talk to us about your first job ever.
My
At what
first
age
job
was
ever,
that?
I still remember it. I was 11, and I put the candy out at the drugstore, and I got paid in candy bars. So I didn't know. I went to Wall Street as an investment banker, which I didn't even know what Wall Street was. So I was at school and had gotten into a program that allowed me to do my undergraduate degree and my graduate degree in 5 years. And so looking for a summer job between my first and second years of my MBA, long story short, I said to a friend of mine, what do we do this summer, who's in the same program? And he said, I don't know, but I heard about this thing called Wall Street. And I said, what's that? And he said, I'm not sure, but I think you do projects and it's finance related. And I had been an accounting major and a finance major, so it sounded okay to me. And so I got a job as a summer associate on Wall Street in 1979. And that's what started my career.
But what did you do that summer?
Just whatever they told me to do.
Make coffee?
No, you didn't make coffee, but you do spreadsheets and things like that. But basically, it was before laptops and, computers and stuff. You did by hand, you did spreadsheets and presentations and decks and things like that. Once
you started your own business, was it steady and gradual, or you hit some moments where like it made you rethink everything?
Well, I had, there's a generational issue about when you become an entrepreneur. So today's, young professionals, they're intentional about being an entrepreneur.
Right.
They go to school, they take classes, et cetera. My generation was not that way.
Right.
Just like my father's generation was not that way. And I started a firm by accident. It was that I had taken a step where I left a place I'd been for a long time, where I wanted to do something different. And I went to a smaller firm where I was quickly knew I'd made a mistake. So one of the things that, in terms of moments in time is how do you handle, back to grit, how do you handle mistakes? So I think the grit, you can give examples. This is an example of, I guess, grit, is that I went somewhere and within 3 days I knew I'd made a mistake. And I'd been a senior guy at a big firm, and here I was at some place and it wasn't right and it didn't feel right. And long story short, after a few months, basically said no harm, no foul. And they said, what are you gonna do? I said, I don't know. They didn't know what to do. We were both embarrassed about it. And that led me to step back, figure out what to do. And I was doing business, but I wasn't comfortable because I wasn't in an organization that I felt a part of. And even though that year I probably made more money than I ever made before, I was miserable because I wasn't a part of something. And that convinced me to build something.
At what point in your professional life did you all of a sudden realize that you need to become a giver or a substantial giver?
That's all newer to me. Well, philanthropy may not be, but Jewish philanthropy is the last 10 or 15 years for me. But I grew up, my father was, involved with working with kids with the developmentally disabled kids, which I ended up becoming once they decided to have young members on the board, they put me on the board, and they all quit and left me with it. But so I'd been around philanthropy in some way, but where it was really shaped is that I worked at a firm called Bear Stearns. And Bear Stearns had a real culture of philanthropy, such that actually as a partner, you were required to give at least 4% of your income every year. Didn't matter where you give it, as long as you gave it. And, when you think about that, before I became a partner, I thought I was giving away a good amount of money to philanthropy, but it turns out I wasn't giving the 4%. And, you've got to be held accountable to it. And so I learned my philanthropy at Bear Stearns with mentors, people watching what they did and how they did it. That's where I learned it.
And how do you decide, where to invest your charity dollars?
You have to learn it. You have to learn what works for yourself over time. And I've always had a mix of small local things where you can really see and feel what's going on, like America's Camp. You can go be there and watch what's happening. Or my alma mater, where I was on the executive committee of the health system, where it's a huge organization, $12 billion budget, and you have a different type of role. So it really depends. But a unifying thing for me is I'll give money to most people that ask for reasonable causes, friends, acquaintances, or things like that. But where I'm going to give most of my money is where I can give my time, and then my time is a major part of my philanthropy to multiply and magnify the impact of my money.
So you use your professional talents to make sure that your dollars are working as hard as they could.
Or just basically, magnifying what the dollars do.
You talked a little bit about the Orphans Fund, but as a Jewish person, how did October 7th hit you?
Everybody knows where they were. I was at a wedding in Lake Como, Italy, of which it was not a Jewish wedding. It was a very close friend of ours' daughter getting married. And we were there, and I'm on the phone with Israel, talking to I have cousins there, and you're watching the news, but you have to pretend to be okay on the wedding. So that was, that was a tough moment for all of us. Then I went to Israel 3 weeks later. So I was in Israel in early November of 23.
When things were still very scattered.
Oh yeah, I went with AJC. I'm on the executive council of the AJC and associate chair of something. But so a group of us went in November of 23.
And what did you see when you went there?
In retrospect, when I think about my first couple of trips there, I came away clinically depressed. I didn't know I was, but it was just so tough. And people were just, worried about whether or not Israel would survive, right? So there's the trauma of the loss of October 7th, but then the fear of what that meant going forward. And I do believe that period before the pager incident, that from the time of October 7th to the pagers was probably the most uncertain period that I could ever imagine that Israel went through. But that was a tough period. I was there a couple times during that period, and it was very difficult.
What makes you most proud to be a Jew?
The community and our ability to survive. And our, to your point about, grit, it's how do we get here? I'm not a religious person. For me, it's very cultural and community-based. I've tried to see if I can weave it back into spirituality. It hasn't really worked for me, but I don't need it. I've studied with some people to try to figure it out, but I struggle with the concept of a benevolent God that would allow the Holocaust to happen or
your
kids to
personal
lose their
situation,
parents.
right?
So I struggle with that. But that doesn't change my commitment to the community. But so there's something out there that allowed us to survive all these years when everybody just wants to kill us, when once again just wants to kill us. So my pride is survival, is the fact that we can survive and prosper in an environment where people just hate us.
What would you tell? You have an opportunity to have a conversation with a kid who's in one of America's top colleges, and literally they're scared. And what they're hearing from their professors, from the students on the college campuses, is really questioning their right to exist as a Jew, as someone that's connected to Israel. What do you tell a student like that?
Fight back and don't accept it. But every kid is different. It's easy for me to say that. I don't know what I would have been able to do or not do at that time in my life. How you function, I think it's a matter of just feeling good about yourself and to know that we've been here for a long time. We're not going anywhere. And these guys come and go, and it's going to be painful. But if we do the right thing and stay with the fight, we'll be okay. But I also believe you have to fight. And I think too often in our history, we've taken it rather than fought, and I think we have to fight.
Thinking back, as a teenager, as a child who clearly went through a lot of challenges, certainly not knowing how life would pan out for you, particularly, fast forwarding 40, 50 years later, knowing what you know now, of course, what do they say? Hindsight is 2020. But what would you have told yourself? Like, what do you need to know, or maybe what would you have corrected if you had a chance to?
That's where becoming a father matters, right? It's a matter of, what have I told myself, but more, what have I told my kids, right? So I have 3 sons. They're adult sons. And, there are certain things that we felt very strongly about it. But one thing about, having a successful life, it's a balance of your personal and your professional life, but that we work hard. And you go to work and you spend a lot of time at work, very, important part of our lives. And I said, whatever you do, I don't care what it is, as long as you like it. If you don't like it, you're never going to put the time and the energy in to be as effective at it. So I don't care what it is, but you better like it. And that was one important thing that I learned, is like it.
I agree. What do they say? If you love your job, you don't work a day in your life.
Why is work a pejorative term?
Correct.
Right? I work. I like working. Some might argue I don't have to work.
I was going to ask you that question. Why do you work?
Because I love it.
Great. That's fantastic.
I love working, and I love working with younger people, that know a lot but don't have the reps, so that they have the experience that matters.
Do you have any mentors that have really assisted you along your life, either personal or professional?
So I had one, which was my first boss, who actually was in charge of recruiting of the firm I went to work for out of business school, and I worked then in his group for 5 years. Passed away a couple weeks ago, so I've been thinking about this. I got a note from one of his sons, and I knew his kids and everything. But it's really about work-life balance. We put a lot into our work. We're very worried about how we do, et cetera. And I got out of business school at 23. So I was like a go-getter trying to get going. And I'm working for this guy, and he was just a wonderful man. And I used to get frustrated because we had things to do, but yet he was worrying about his kids' hockey program or the basketball this or that, and he had 5 kids. And I would be like, we got to go to work. We got to go to work. We're doing all this. And so the irony of that one is, so years later, he then, after I left, I started doing healthcare then, but then focused on it a little later. Some years later, he left and went to a healthcare venture fund. So we stayed in touch. Didn't do much together, but we just stayed in touch. And at one point, he called me and asked me to come meet a company with him. And I said, I can't. He said, why not? I said, I'm going to my son's basketball game. Oh. So a lot of yucks.
Karma.
Right. So it was kind of, that's what he taught me.
Could I drill down on it a little bit? Because I think a lot of the people who listen to this and view this are thinking about starting families and the importance of career. They want to have financial success. How do you balance that very delicate balance between your family and at the same time really building your professional success?
Well, you have to have a good partnership with your spouse,
okay,
right? Because I think,
So shout out to your wife.
She would argue that she's, raised kids as a single parent. I was never around during the week, and that was just a deal. And she was, but on the weekends I tried to be there. That didn't mean I wasn't working or traveling. But I think it's a matter of having a partnership to be able to do that. But then it's a matter of it's your attitude to prioritize it. And one of the things that's difficult is the question of where you work and whether or not they respect your commitment to your family. So, working at a big investment bank, no one cares about whether or not you're going to go to a basketball game or not. You just got to do what you got to do. And I found, and what happens at these firms is there's a lot of politics, and a lot of your emotional energy goes to politics as opposed to doing your job. I was able to, by starting a new firm, my goal was, what I had to do was very pure, is build a business. I didn't have to worry about politics, it was build a business.
Curtis, I'm asking you a personal question, is that okay?
Sure. I might not answer it. But
what makes you happy?
It's a great question. I don't know. It changes. That's the goal to self-actualization is try to figure that stuff out, right? Obviously, my family, my kids, my grandkids makes me happy. Work, developing the work, making the money obviously is great, but that's kind of table stakes. That's a measuring stick, which is easy for me to say because I've been fortunate. But it's about the development of people and them being a part of a community where people are getting out of it what they need. And everybody's different. In building a team, I always tell people, I'm big on sports analogies, and just because you want to play center doesn't mean you can. Maybe you should be a point guard because you're small and fast and dribble, right? Up, whatever it will be. But there are different roles on a team. You got to work it through. And I believe that people need to understand what they're good and bad at and to know where they fit and to help them figure that out so they can be more effective and make organizations work more effectively.
So to someone that's starting off their life and just trying to figure so many things out, what's the best piece of advice you could give them?
Is understand success is not a straight line, right? That's one of the things I think is an issue, is that people look at us, at my generation that might have been, were successful, and they say, oh, look, they did it. And our kids might feel the same way. Look where they are. But success is not a straight line. And you have to understand that it's going to have its ups and downs, and that hopefully at the end of the day, it's an upward trajectory, but there'll be times when it'll be down. And that's part of life. And you've got to be able to, as you started this discussion with, in terms of being able to overcome it with grit, but just accept it, deal with it, and keep going.
This has been extremely insightful, and I appreciate the opportunity to pick your brain.
Okay.
I wish you loads of success in your professional life and the great things that you're doing for the Jewish people. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you for listening to Jewish Grit, an Olami Mentorship podcast. At Olami Mentorship, we believe that everyone needs a mentor. What better way is there to tap into your personal and professional potential than with a Jewish mentor at your side? Learn more at olami.org/mentorship. Don't forget to keep listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.